Well, can you say the same about Kundun?
Is what I'll say to that, Scott. Yes. I think that most people, not unreasonably, would associate Martin Scorsese with crime and gangster film. Gangster? Yes. Martin Scorsese's famous gangster films, which is like grungy gangster. It's a new genre he's pioneering, yes. Crime and gangster films. But he has had an extremely varied career, including musicals, steampunky odes to cinema pioneers, stories of 17th century Christian priests in feudal Japan, and even a documentary on Bob Dylan. Even within that varied body of work, though, one of the somewhat more surprising entries into his canon must be 1997's Kundun, a tale of the life of the 14th Dalai Lama, Tenzin Gyatso, from his rebirth until the time he was forced into exile in India, and based on Gyatso's own writing. The first half of the film concerns the finding of the Dalai Lama as a child, his upbringing in the monastery, and his assumption of the duties as spiritual and political leader of Tibet before he's ready, while in the background constantly looms the threat, and from our perspective knowledge, that China is getting ready to steal his country. The second portion deals with the Lama's role as a leader in a nation occupied by the Chinese army, and his dealings with Chairman Mao. Why isn't this guy vilified like Hitler is? I've never understood this. He was despicable and he was responsible for the deaths of tens of millions of people. I really don't get it, but also I may be straying from the point, Zedong, for which he was ill-equipped by experience. As China tightens its grip on Tibet and becomes more violent, Gyatso flees the country for the not unreasonable desire to not immediately be dead. Well, he's the Dalai Lama, not immediately be dead again. And to lead his people from abroad until such time as non-violent means free his country. Kundun, I find rather hard to talk about, as I don't think it's unfair to characterise it as a bunch of things that happen. Certainly its structure is quite episodic and not particularly well tied together, a series of vignettes that feel like they've been plucked from a journal, which is almost certainly what they are. It is, however, interesting. Portions of the life and intertwined religion of a country and culture not particularly well known to English-speaking audiences. Though for that reason, it also frustrates because, well, I want to know what that thing is and why those guys are doing that thing. It's also largely cast with non-actors, and while that lends an air of authenticity to many passages, the stiltedness with which many deliver the lines can be jarring. It's probably just best to try to absorb the atmosphere and look up the details later. That experience of absorption would, fortunately, be pretty enjoyable, even with Philip Glass's score. Actually, I'm being unfair. This is a Philip Glass score which I actually like. Yeah. Amazing, since, with a couple of exceptions, Can Live With It is generally the best I can ever hope for with his work. And that enjoyable experience, unsurprisingly, is due in large part to Roger Deakins. Are we seeing a theme here, people? I've not seen this since it was first released in home video. My usual note here that this is, despite of course owning it for years in the interim, and I'd forgotten quite how beautiful it is. Filmed in the Atlas Mountains of Morocco as a very convincing stand-in for Tibet, it's the sort of landscape you'd honestly have to work very hard to not make look gorgeous, or at least striking, just by setting the camera down and taking off the lens cap. But Deakins elevates it to something greater. A place that seems at the same time tranquil and impossibly harsh, beautiful and cruel, a setting where it is not difficult to wonder at the flourishing of spirituality. There's an otherworldliness to it, an appropriately meditative, dreamlike quality, and Deakins himself has described the film as being like a tone poem more than a narrative, and I can really see where he's coming from. It's definitely not a film that's going to satisfy many, perhaps not even most, but I would suggest it's interesting enough if you haven't seen it, and well, you probably haven't, and there's a reason for that. Disney bought the distribution rights, then pretty much torpedoed it instantly because of China, with then CEO and total asshat Michael Eisner saying it was a stupid mistake, and that the film was an insult to our friends, but other than journalists, few people in the world ever saw it. Well, I'm glad, and aren't you, that sort of behaviour's behind them? Oh, did you hear that Disney blocked distribution of an episode of Last Week Tonight with John Oliver in India because it was critical of the Indian Prime Minister Narendra Modi? That was 3 days ago. Disney are a bunch of Russian fronts, to use some Robert Rankin Nazi rhyming slang.
Yeah, Disney going to Disney. First time I've seen Kundun, and it's fine. Let's say it is a bunch of stuff that happened. Let's say because it's a bunch of stuff that I'm not particularly familiar with. That was interesting. I didn't really know anything about. Obviously, I've got a bit better of a grasp of the kind of post-exile Dalai Lama stuff. But
yeah,
all the bits before that, I didn't really know. I wasn't even sure he was actually in occupied Tibet at any point. But yes, this kind of does a very good job of explaining at least, I guess, the highlights of that. It's by no means a warts and all telling of the years of occupation and all that, but it does makes a good fist of getting that across without really going into an awful lot of detail, but that's fine. I don't think it needs to.
Or any.
Yeah, it's as you say, it's like journal entries in a way. To be honest, don't have an awful lot to add from what you're saying there. It does look lovely. There's some incredible compositions in there, like shots of that landscape with like the monasteries up on the third as well. Just as they're all kind of getting up to and climbing up the stairs. There's all lots of just fast forward to any random point in this and you'll be greeted with something that looks lovely. It is as much a triumph of costume design as it is cinematography. All the colours and just the riot of how that looks and just the day-to-day life looks absolutely spectacular. And yes, visually it's an absolutely fascinating film. Content-wise, it's perhaps less fascinating. It's sort of interesting, but more on a kind of almost intellectual level rather than feeling awfully invested in anything that's happening, which is a terrible thing to say given what's going on to it. But I think that's perhaps where not having professional actors kind of hurts it a little bit, in as much as it's harder to get invested with some of them when the performances are perhaps not. They're not quite naturalistic enough, even though it's someone without training. But if you take an actor who doesn't have any training in acting and just lets them do it, that's not the same as being natural at it. You can't just have people say just pretend to do your normal stuff and have them actually do their normal stuff, because the act of observing that will change how they do their stuff. And perhaps that's why it doesn't quite work on that level. But
it can work, that, Scott, the whole non-actor thing, and it's happened from time to time. One that particularly comes to my mind quite easily is City of God.
Yeah.
Set in the favelas of Rio. I think perhaps because that was those kids basically doing their life because they were from that area.
Yeah.
This is a bit different, I think. And
yes, none of these people actually are the Dalai Lama. So close, but
yeah. And I wonder if sometimes they're picked more for being able to speak. It's Tibetan a language? I'm afraid I don't actually know now I think about it. Whatever their native languages as well as English.
Yeah.
So that maybe restricts the pool as well. There's not a lot of what I'm guessing is Tibetan in it, but there's some, so that's maybe why too. And the actor playing the grown-up Dalai Lama is the actual grand nephew of the real Dalai Lama, and I kind of feel he was cast maybe either for some sort of historical veracity or more politely because he looks a bit like
him. Yeah.
And it suffers a bit from that, so it's a bit stilted. Some people are better than others. The guy playing, and maybe some of these are actually professional actors, I've not looked 100% into exactly where everybody had come from. The woman playing his mother is reasonably okay, and one of his two prime ministers in particular, who has quite a lot of dialogue, which is just as well, is pretty good. The rest of the people, it's a fairly mixed bag. What I found was, while I was watching this too, it's interesting. I don't know much about this country or this culture. It's really interesting to see. And what I kept thinking was, I'd kind of like to see a documentary of this, rather than a slightly disjointed drama.
Yeah,
it's not quite satisfying in drama terms or in teaching me terms.
Yeah.
But at least I'm like, it's bloody lovely while it's not teaching me.
Yeah. Yeah, I don't regret watching it, but I'd struggle to say it's essential Scorsese viewing. But it's definitely worth putting on there.
For me, it's I would put it higher up any potential viewing order than 1984.
True.
I find it a more compelling film than that, and a more satisfying film. Also, it looks nice, but again, with 1984, that's not the point. It's meant to look hideous. It's just vaguely frustrating.
Mm-hmm.
That's my general takeaway from that. It's like, it doesn't quite satisfy me, visuals aside, in almost any way. And I feel like with a few changes it could.
Yeah.
What it has reminded me too of is that there isn't any such thing as a Martin Scorsese film. There is no particular style or trait that really marks it as a Scorsese film. It just makes a number of good and interesting films that are all very different. And it just does me think, I kind of wish he'd worked with Roger Deakins more.
Yeah, yeah.
That could have led to some very interesting collaborations.
Yeah.
Yeah. So, from Kundun.